So like most artists, I have what you might call a messy mind. My brain is all over the place. When it comes to creativity, I'm bouncing all over. It's hard for me to focus on individual pieces of art, much less the big picture. So from time to time, I look back at the work that I'm creating just to take stock and see, what am I doing? What are the patterns that are emerging? What should I be focused on moving forward? And it really does help give me sort of some guide rails about, what I should be putting my time and energy into. So in this video, that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to look back over the past year's worth of work. This is going to be a bit of a longer video. So I'll put chapter markers in for the individual pieces if you want to bounce around between them and learn about those in particular. If I've created a video related to some of these works, I'll include a link in the description to those videos as well. So you can check those out some other time. So this is going to be a bit of a stream of consciousness video where I'm just going to talk about like a minute or so about each of the pieces and try to think through things like what was my motivation, what were my intentions, what was the outcome of the piece, what did I learn from it, the experience, and how will some of this influence my work moving forward. And hopefully, this video will be helpful for anyone who's kind of dealing with some of the similar issues of having, that nonlinear brain that's all over the place and sometimes not really having a sense of direction in your work or style or whatever. So maybe these thought processes can help some of you if you're dealing with some of the same things that I do. So there's definitely a theme this year I could see already where I go back and forth between experimenting with primarily realistic subject matter and techniques, and then going back to more abstract, intuitive stuff that I've been doing for years. And you'll see that pattern emerge as we go into this video, like bouncing back and forth between those two approaches. So I had these acrylic pours that I had created years ago, and I just wanted to put objects on top of them. I just thought it would be interesting to kind of mix realistic styles with abstract styles. And this one in particular looked like an ocean to me, like a landscape flying above a landscape. And so I found this photographer, Mike Kelly, who has these amazing photographs of airplanes from above, mostly at airports or whatever. And I reached out to him and asked him if I could have permission to reference some of his art, some of his photography for this painting. And he was super gracious. He was awesome. He was, really cool. Appreciated me reaching out. Totally gave me permission to do whatever I wanted. And then after it was over, he actually promoted, the painting on his Instagram and had some really nice things to say about it. And so it was a really cool experience overall. The thing I liked about this was I really liked the perspective, the depth that I got between, the airplane in the background. And I added a little ship in there to even sort of enhance that effect, to make it feel like, there was something on the surface to further separate the airplane from the background. And I think it worked really well. This was an experiment, so I would classify this as an experiment with style and just playing around with different subject matter. This will start a theme of things that require more time and patience and the need to be careful, like painting realistic subjects, and then I'll kind of flip into something that's a little more abstract and free. It's like my brain needs that relief. And so after a painting like this, I go through a period of like a month or so where I just work on nothing but intuitive abstract stuff. So I had painted some hummingbirds and some flamingos last year, and I'd had several people show interest in want me to do more of those. And so decided to revisit that subject matter. And again, I just wanted to do something that was loose and free and didn't require a lot of focus and patience. And so this one was just an exercise to go larger with the flamingos that I'd been doing and try to build up, even more texture and color and just do a really bold, dramatic painting that had lots of texture and color. I ended up selling this piece near the end of the year, again, to one of the people that had shown interest in it, in the subject before, and I was really, really happy with it. So from there, I just continued to work on flamingos for a while. Again, very abstract, very loose, very small. A lot of times when I'm doing subjects like this, I will paint more than one painting at the same time. In fact, if someone shows interest or wants a painting of a certain style or type, sometimes I'll do several versions of the same subject at the same time and just let them pick which one they like best. And in this case, the client ended up taking all of these. And so I had intended to paint these separately and have them as individual paintings, but the client ended up liking them all in one vertical strip. And so they're going to get them framed that way. And I think it's a really interesting idea. I didn't stop with flamingos. I started playing around with fish and flowers and all kinds of other subject matter. But for the most part, it was just take a break from doing something that requires a lot of patience and do something that's a lot more intuitive and free flowing, and just give myself a break. And these kind of paintings are really easy to me. And so, I mean, these are still experiments because I'm experimenting with subject matter, but I think for the most part, stylistically, it's not a stretch for me to do stuff like this. And so this was kind of a safe place to be for a while. And looking back on it, I'm really happy. I'm really happy with kind of where this work was going. And I'm sure I know I learned something in this process. It might even be subconsciously, but I feel like these things will come back in the future, and I'll use some of these techniques moving forward for sure. Yeah, and around this time after the flowers, I tried to do a landscape in the same style, like a very abstract landscape, and it just wasn't working out. And it's almost like I did a video on this. I think I rejected it. I just got sick of it, and I wanted to I had to get some energy out and have some fun. And so I was motivated to do the landscape because I felt like I was thinking about, pairing up the landscapes with flamingos and trying to get into some galleries and things that all were motivated about money. And then I ended up just getting frustrated and deciding to do something completely free and open. And I painted over the landscape, and I made this painting, which is this connected faces, interlocking faces, very graffiti style, textural painting. And I had a lot of fun with it, and it was really freeing and cathartic to just knock this out. It was the first time I started playing a little bit with mixing styles. So there's a couple not realistic, but more representational rendered eyes in this painting. But for the most part, this was just a very, coming from a very instinctual place. And I'm going to revisit that a little bit later in some of the other work that I know that's coming up. But yeah, no real goal in mind other than just to put down color, put down shapes, have fun, and see what emerges. I posted the original airplane on social media and in some Discord channels and stuff, and it got some people were interested, and one person in particular who is a pilot reached out to me and asked if I would do a commission very similar to the other painting, but using the airplane that they fly for their work. And so that's what this piece was. I did an acrylic pour specifically for this piece. I tried really hard to replicate the first one. It just wasn't possible. I couldn't replicate the pour like I had done it a couple years ago, but it still was, good enough. And I ended up painting the clouds in this one by hand on top of the acrylic pour, and worked with the client to get specs on the airplane, and I had a lot of fun with it. I think it turned out really well. I think it's what they were expecting, and the client seemed very happy with it, so I was overall very pleased. And this one probably wasn't as painstaking as the one before. I think I was a little more relaxed when I was painting this one. I think I was ready for this type of work again, right? After doing all these abstract loose things, it's like I was ready to take on more subjects that require patience and focus. Around this time, I started finding out about the artist Greg Crayola Simpkins. I've mentioned him in my videos if you've watched any of them before. And his work basically blew me away because I've avoided realistic subjects for several reasons, but one of them was primarily because I didn't understand or know that you could achieve certain results with acrylic paint. There's more than that. I just love intuitive, primitive painting, work that comes from, an instinctual place. And I get a thrill out of that kind of work. But I also love the idea of world building and fantasy scenes and being able to paint anything you want. So I made a conscious effort from this point on to start playing around with more realistic or representational subject matter. And that's what led to this painting of this sea creature. I had painted this fish before, but in a very simple style. And so the whole goal of this one was primarily to learn how to paint things like this, like fantasy scenes, work on gradients, color, like waves, obviously. Just practice, building up skills. This piece ended up being sort of the centerpiece for an art show that I did later in the year, and it was sold the first day. So anyways, it was a very successful piece, and I think I'm going to definitely revisit this subject matter in the future. I don't know when. Right on the heels of that, I started looking at painting other things that interest me. That again, Greg Simpkins, his work is so interesting to me. He includes all these creatures and insects and abstract things, and it's all stuff that again, I'm not trying to copy this guy, but I want to be able to paint some of the same things that he paints, right? Like I like birds and I like bugs and I like interesting fantasy scenes. And so this Scarab here is really just my attempt to try to paint some of that stuff, but on a smaller scale. So this whole painting was, again, on top of an acrylic pour that I had done in the past. I like this idea of, single objects kind of framed within a painting. And I wanted to practice painting with gold. Painted the Scarab in the middle of this pink background, played with toning, played with adding in different symbols. And in my mind, this was going to be a lot cleaner than it ended up, but I still feel like it was a fairly successful attempt. I added a little humor in there in a couple spots. Like all the symbols mean something to me, so it was kind of a fun little exercise to do a symbolic painting that has meaning to me personally. And this painting was also in the show. Yeah, so this ended up being acquired by another friend of mine who really liked it. So then another colleague and friend reached out and wanted me to do a commission that was different than anything I'd ever done, which was taking their wedding photo and making it in the style of one of my figure drawings that they'd seen and liked. And so the challenge here was, to try and create this portrait, make the people look somewhat recognizable, like from the photograph, but at the same time abstract. It was a fun little challenging piece, and I think they were really happy with it, and so that's always good. And it was a little break from, again, the things that were taking more focus and patience. So another little surrealist painting, again, trying to practice some of the techniques and things that Greg Simpkins does. Really cool cloudy, abstract, fantasy backgrounds, world building, practicing subjects like the insects, like the Junebug, the toy block, again packing it with symbols and things that mean something to me personally, and doing it on a small scale, but just as practice. The idea the whole time was just kind of prove to myself I can do these kind of things, and then see how I can scale it up and take it larger and more interesting and more complex in the future. So I mentioned I had a show. It was about this time of the year I had this show, and it was a mix of all the different things that I've been doing over the last couple of years. So there's no real stylistic cohesion here. It's just that these are all things I made. So this whole last couple of years has really been me experimenting with a lot of different styles and trying to figure out what I'm interested in and what gives me energy and passion and what people are responding to. So this was another commission that ended up taking a ton of time. I had a ton of fun with this one. So this one, it's kind of a nostalgic piece. It's about a place. It's obviously about Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania overall, and it's for a friend of mine. It was a commission, and the idea was to try to capture this, to present it in a way that felt like a memory. I started this video talking about messy minds, and I feel like memories are kind of like that, especially the older we get and the more time has passed. You remember things kind of all mushed up together, and so I kind of wanted to capture that feeling. There's an artist, I think his name is Steve Penley, and he does this kind of work, but obviously far advanced. But it is similar work where he smushes all this imagery up together and makes it really abstract. It's kind of like this montage or collection or collage style, work of mashing all these things together, and that's all I was trying to do here. This is a fairly large piece. Had a lot of fun with it. Hid a ton of symbols in this piece. Like it's almost like a treasure hunt. There's lots of little things that are hard to find. You have to kind of look closely to see them, and so and obviously it's packed with things that have meaning for the client, and I think they were super happy with it. And then we go right back to the Greg Simpkins practice again. So I started doing this really large painting. It's not finished yet. I worked in this cloud in the background, and then on top of that, I put in this mountain scene with a face on the mountain. I've done that character before, but I never painted it at this scale and with this much detail. I'm going to add a big bird in this painting, and I wanted the bird to be able to sit on something, so I created this Tiki for it to stand on. So big picture is this is going to be a fantasy scene that's just packed with lots of imagery, and again, I'm scaling up from some of the smaller paintings that I did earlier, like the Junebug and the Scarab. This is kind of the next step, right? I'm still working on paper. I haven't gone to wood panel or canvas, but I kind of proved to myself that I can paint these little things in a realistic way, and I can do world building, and I have like some concepts and ideas of how to make an interesting fantasy scene. And so now I'm scaling up and going larger, and I'm gonna paint the big stuff first, and then slowly start to work in some smaller, more intricate things. So this painting will be one that I continue in the next, coming months and year, and try to complete whenever I have time. So then I got another commission. This is for a friend whose pet had passed away. I took it as an opportunity to try to mix the two styles together, like use the abstract thing that I do in the background. This cat was originally from Miami, and so I wanted to capture that sort of Miami Vice vibe with the colors and the palm trees in the background, and very abstract and loose. Again, mixing styles, right, with the graffiti-like crown, the Basquiat crown, above the somewhat realistic cat, and the main goal of this was just to capture the portrait of the cat, appropriately named Thomas, in a way that was recognizable. So this next one is interesting because it's different from everything up until this point. This one was purely based on inspiration. I saw a challenge that was posted by the artist Brendan Benson, who I follow on Instagram, and he had this amazing character called Frankenshroom. And I mean, without any thought at all, when I saw this, I immediately just had a visual in my mind of how I would paint a version of this. And that was what the challenge was, right? It was a draw this on your own style challenge. And so there wasn't a ton of thought. I sketched out a couple sketches. I just grabbed a piece of paper and I started putting down what I saw in my mind and was very loose with it. I had a ton of fun with this one. It came together really quickly. I think that the previous more realistic stuff that I'd done in the year made it possible for me to attempt to do this without it being overwhelming or feeling like work. Yeah, I just had a lot of fun with it, and I ended up getting third place in his contest, which was awesome because there were some really great entries. So that was really rewarding. I couldn't be happier with how it turned out, and we're keeping this one in the family. So next we have another commission. They had a very specific request. They wanted a Mockingbird and a Magnolia tree, and so I quickly decided I want to do a realistic version of this. Still on the same theme of like obsessed with Greg Simpkins, the way he paints birds. I want to have that sort of in my toolkit, and the only way you can get there is by practice and by working. So I took this opportunity to do a very realistic approach. The cool thing about this one is I took photographs of my neighbor's Magnolia tree, and I used Photoshop to create the background and the layout. I used a copyright-free image in the public domain for the bird. And yeah, this one required a ton of patience. Like just trying to get the color of the trees correct or close enough was a challenge unto itself. And so super pleased with how it turned out. Client's really happy. We got it framed really nice and everything. So I think it looks great. I know I can do even better with this kind of subject matter, but I can see progress. Like I know where I'm getting better and that I'm improving. And so that's kind of exciting. And it's really fun to look back on these and sort of revisit them. Similar to the faces painting a while back, where I got a bit back where I got sort of frustrated and fed up and started, just going crazy with these geometric shapes. This is a large canvas that's been sitting in my studio for a couple of years now, and I had painted it. I had painted some abstract birds on it, and I basically just kind of got sick of it and tired of looking at it, and I decided to just paint over it. So I wanted this one to be just very intuitive, and so I've just started. So this work isn't complete. It's definitely a work in progress, but it's just an exercise of me kind of dumping sort of my childhood memories, good and bad, all these adventures and misadventures and feelings and just lightness and darkness. It's, just this cathartic exercise to just get stuff out on canvas. And so playing with different styles, no rules, just intuitively painting whatever I feel like on this canvas. And so there's also some symbolism in there and kind of a creative deep dive into my brain in my past. And I'll probably be working on and off on this piece for the next 6 months or a year. Just as I find time and get inspiration, I'll be adding to it. So from that one, I started experimenting with painting crawfish and cicadas, and I was doing that primarily to see what kind of fine lines I could get with different tools. And so I used very thin brushes, I used sticks, and I ended up using a drafting pen as well to try to get this delicate line work, and just playing with contrast again and styles and mixing, interesting techniques. So we'll see where this goes. Just an experiment. Yeah, so we're kind of getting late in the year here, and this is another repeat client who came back and wanted a hummingbird. And the challenge here was just to try to recreate one of the hummingbirds I'd done last year. And so I did it this time on a wood panel, it's a solid little painting. I think the struggle is that it doesn't necessarily capture the energy that was in the first painting that I was trying to replicate. And I think that's just, it's just hard for me to replicate the energy that was in the first piece. And so when I compare the two, I like the first one better. But again, it's a fine little painting, and the client was happy, so it's all good. Another commission piece that I was asked to do, kind of commemorating a moment in time. Again, my goal here was to try to, similar to the Pittsburgh piece, recreate a time and a place based on memories and sort of this nostalgic feeling mixture of, trying to capture a place and a time visually in a way that was interesting. And there's a lot of symbolism in here as well, and some hidden meaning. So the client's really happy with it, and I'm happy with it. It took a lot of time. This is a larger piece. It's probably, I think it's like 24 by 36 maybe. And there'll be a video of this one probably coming out in the future, time-lapse video of this one coming out. So after all of that, recently I decided to revisit the Faces series that I've been working on for decades. I just have this sort of instinctual, primal desire to make these types of paintings. And, I've talked a lot about this whole interconnectedness of all things in the past, and how I got started painting these things over 20 years ago, and all the reasons why, the very personal reasons why I started doing these in the first place. And I'm not sure I can articulate with words everything that's going on here. This type of visual expression comes from a very deep place inside, and it's a place where there is no written language or no words. Even if there were, it's really up to the individual viewer to make, what they will of these things and interpret it in their own way. Let's just say that, these pieces are super fun for me, and they give me energy and they make me smile. It's really cool to watch them unfold and come to life as I'm creating them. Some people are really moved by them. It connects to people. They have a visceral reaction to them. And after doing a bunch of different styles and experimenting, I'm really going to focus on this at the beginning of the year for sure. I will experiment some more. I'm going to play with other subjects and styles. I have to have variety. So I'm sure I'm going to play around with other things, but I really, really want to focus on this series again in the coming months. I have some big plans for these. I have a lot of paintings in mind around this whole subject matter. I'm creating some NFTs of this art already, which is a whole nother subject. I'm fired up. I'm fired up to kind of dig back into this, and I'm hopeful that people will respond to it. I would love to hear any comments that anyone has, especially if you made it this far, on any of the stuff you've seen. Hopefully if you're dealing with some of the similar issues as me, as an artist on this journey, trying to figure out your style, trying to figure out what to paint, trying to figure out what it all means, maybe this will be useful or interesting to you. Please leave me a comment. Let's connect. I'd love to hear from you. So I'd just like to say, thanks to everyone who's given me support over the last couple of years. I appreciate it. Folks who've watched and liked and subscribed and commented and just kind of hung out with me on this journey. Really appreciate it. And, I just hope everyone has a very blessed and happy new year. Thanks again. See you next time. Peace.